Before that, I would like to ask also the panelists now to come up here on stage while I will also introduce them to you. Thank you very much for being with us tonight. We have Elizabeth Leth, originally from the US. She's an art historian with degrees from the University of Chicago and the University of Bologna. She has over 20 years of experience as a Rome-based guide. She also teaches at Duquesne University's Italian campus. I was fearing that I would not get that right. And the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas. Also, she's an author of several books. We have with us as well Father John Wauck. He's from Chicago. He's a priest here of Opus Dei, based in Rome. And Rome has been his home for the last 28 years. He studied Renaissance history and literature at Harvard University and holds a doctorate in philosophy from the Pontifical University of the Holy Cross, where he's also currently teaching literature and communication of the faith. And our own Anthony Johnson, he's our senior video producer in the projects department at EWTN, our Vatican Bureau. He has many, many years of professional video experience in editing, shooting, also aerial cinematography, producing and presenting. Since 2017, he's working with us at the EWTN Vatican Bureau, and he's contributing, of course, to Vaticano that we saw, but also has many projects in the digital space. One of them are called EWTN Travel. If you want to look that up, it's quite inspiring and quite inspiring also pieces, not only the Vatican Museums that you can see on there. He's a graduate of Gonzaga University in Spokane, Washington, where he studied classical civilization and broadcast journalism. Thank you. And Liz, if you allow me maybe to start with you from an art historian perspective. How have faith and art, and we are talking today about treasures of faith and art, how have they inspired each other over the centuries?
Well, this is a perfect place, I have to say, to be thinking about that. Here we are sort of inside this extraordinary space, a stone's throw from the tomb of St. Peter, in this place where we've been telling this Christian story for so many centuries. And a big part of how the Christians communicated their story, the Christians, it's about communication, right? So this is a very apt subject for EWTN to get more and more interested in, because from the very beginning, the question is, how do we communicate this great message, this great revelation? And of course, we have scripture and we have the liturgy, but very early on, the Christians understood that art would be a very powerful form of communication. They were speaking, they were evangelizing in the world of Gentiles. And you look around the city, you look all around the Mediterranean, and you see how the Mediterranean really transmitted messages, whether it's the Roman Empire or the Magna Grecia culture, always through art. And the Christians found a way of transforming this medium of communication, which is art, to infuse it with its own message. And it has just become a success story from the 3rd century, when the Christians first started producing art, right up until the treasures that we have right next to us here in the Vatican Museums.
Thank you very much. Father, maybe let's talk a little bit about communication. If we talk about faith and art, how important has art been, and maybe how important is art today in communicating the faith, also maybe to those who are interested or also ignorant?
When I think of art and its role in the communication of the faith, I always go back to the Middle Ages. There's a poem by Francois Villon in the 1400s in France, that it's part of his book called The Testament, a series of poems that he wrote to be left behind when he died, his last testament, so to speak. And he writes a poem in there for his mother. And it's a beautiful poem to the Virgin. And in it, he talks about his mother being illiterate, how she couldn't read, and yet she knew and loved the Madonna because of the paintings that she had seen in the churches. And of course that brings us back to a world where books were rare, and the way to communicate the faith was music, hymns, works of art, statues, paintings, frescoes in churches. Also, even in the literary field, you have that form of literature, which is in fact spectacle, which is theater. And that was a huge part of the communication of the faith in the Middle Ages, popular religious theater, which sort of went out of vogue in the sort of after the Counter-Reformation, partly because you couldn't do it in Protestant countries, obviously, and it lived a little longer in Italy and Spain than it did elsewhere. But that's a reminder, I think, of the sort of perennial effectiveness of theater as a means of communication of the faith that we see today, not necessarily in theaters, but in film and on television. And this, if you think of the success of The Passion of the Christ, that's a medieval passion play filmed with modern technology, done with modern technology. And it was hugely successful. And, you know, the Lord of the Rings and the Chronicles of Narnia are some of the most popular films of recent times. Both of them written by professors of medieval literature, right? Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, right? That's where they're coming from. And we haven't really changed much. It's still as effective as it ever was. It's something we need to embrace, really. Or when you think of the success of The Chosen, right? That way of expressing the faith, especially as people read less and less, is going to become more and more important. Both it's visual and literary.
So art is still very important, even when we speak about communicating the faith. Anthony, you captured all this great work of art in the Vatican Museums on camera, but you're also very active in the digital world, in the social media channels. Is that still relevant? Is art, like historical art and art as we can also experience maybe in this beautiful aula here in the Campo Santo Teutonico, is that even of interest still?
Well, thank you so much, Andreas, for the question, and I hope that all of you enjoyed the short bit that we have here. I would say of my own experience that being an American who is here living in Italy, a lot of my decisions for deciding to go to different places, whether that be ancient ruins or beautiful churches around Europe, are made because of Instagram, for instance. You know, I went to the city of Trier, Germany. I'm probably butchering the pronunciation a bit, but I saw an image on Instagram of a church built by Emperor Constantine that's still there and in great condition. And in many ways, it was a hidden gem when I went there to see all these ancient sites. So for me, I can speak about my experience that it is very impactful that a lot of decisions that I make to grow closer in my faith are very much influenced by digital media. That being said, it can be like you can make that first step, I think, through beauty, but then I think maybe, you know, forums like interviews and podcasts and personal testimonies, that is where you make the next step after that. Because I think it's great to lead with the image, and then after that, you want to delve deeper into the story. But the image is like the hook. The image and the music and everything, I think it reels people in, it captivates them, and then they want more. So as long as you can keep on doing that, then I think any person, whether they're a believer or non-believer, they're going to want to see what's going on there.
Liz, you also encounter many people also when you guide them through Rome, through the Vatican. What is your experience there? How do they react to art and maybe to Christian art?
So I have been leading tours in Rome for, I think it must be coming on 25 years, not a number I admit readily or easily, but I do begin to realize there's a fair amount of experience there of taking people from all different kinds of backgrounds, mostly, of course, English speaking, but I've had my share of people from other places and other countries. And one of the things I get asked the most when people are asking me about doing tours, especially when you get known as a believing tour guide, a person who does a lot of pilgrimages and Catholic tours, do you change your tours? Do you have one kind of tour for the secular people? Do you have another kind of... The answer is actually no. I don't change much. The only thing I would be able to change is that I can obviously, if I'm talking to people who are catechized, I can use a kind of lingo. We can peel away levels, layers in order to get to a deeper meaning. But I find that what really makes people sit at the edge of their seats, get really excited, is when they see through this art that it's really not just a bunch of anecdotes about people's pettiness or disagreements, or, you know, Michelangelo painted the guy he didn't like in the painting, but there's actually a meaning in there, a meaning, a truth that they begin to see. And so I found that art is it has a tremendously powerful impact on people, and this includes the kind of person who starts a tour with, well, I don't really want to hear anything religious. So maybe we don't start immediately talking, but someone's going to say, what's happening in this picture? And if it's the lady with the angel, the conversation eventually moves in that direction. So I find that art is a very, very powerful, it's exactly what you're saying. It's the hook. The beauty of the work of art is the hook. And then this possibility of, I want to know more, and then revealing that underneath it, there's this great vision of redemption, of humanity, of salvation that really makes the work shine.
Which work of art gets you really excited?
Yeah, it's the Sistine Chapel. I mean, I wish I weren't so boring, but I have to say that I just, even from the opening scene, I was like, I don't know how many times I've seen that. There it is. Oh, yes, it's an amazing space. But what makes the Sistine Chapel so amazing and why it's so successful is that at the end of the day, whether or not the people in there realize it, in this incredible series of paintings, which show the beginning and the ending of human history. I mean, it brings every single person together in that space, because this vision of this Genesis, these bare bodies first kind of realizing their power, making their first fall, making fools out of themselves in the drunkenness of Noah, and then led to this promise of salvation. That's, everybody can understand an origin story. I mean, Marvel excels at that, and all we get is origin stories from Marvel. And then there's a sense of, what is our purpose? What are we for? And there it is, in the same room, the Last Judgment. So it really, it's the most extraordinary space. And what makes it so wonderful is there's only one religion. There's only one belief system that could have produced that room. And it's the Catholic faith. It's ours, and it's amazing.
Now we need to go back and watch it again after your Right. Anthony, for you, is that true? Was that also a Sistine Chapel, filming in all those different rooms in the Vatican Museums?
Well, I will say that, I mean, we can show you the whole documentary, but I can share other parts of interviews that we've done. Like, we interviewed 4 patrons, many other restorers and other people who are part of the patrons, and they say that one of the advantages, of the documentary you see there is that you get to experience it in as a place of prayer rather than as, I am a tourist walking around. I mean, you get a little bit of that share of experience. But I would say my favorite space, what's the question again?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A work of art, or
okay,
do you agree with the Sistine Chapel?
Yeah, when I'm in the Sistine Chapel, I think you stand there and you think to yourself, I get it, because you're bombarded with so much imagery that it's hard not to try to look, for the whole picture, but then understand like each piece and how it all fits together. And I think in doing that, you're able to look within yourself and examine and figure out, well, where do I stand in all of this? I'm a human, we're all part of creation, and how does my story fit within this whole cosmos that I'm looking at right now? That's what I get the most out of the Sistine Chapel. And then in terms of the entire Vatican Museums, seeing the collections of the sculptures from ancient Rome and ancient Greece, all the antiquities there, because when I went there for the first time when I was 19 years old, I was a little bit dumbfounded by the fact that the Vatican had all these ancient sculptures, not that they were all Christian, so to say, but it was very, not strange, but it piqued my curiosity as why we as Catholics would collect things that are not a part of Catholicism. And it's this appreciation for humanity and for all of creation, which is what I learned from that.
And I mean, it's really incredible seeing how much effort goes into preserving and restoring works of arts. And I think there's I don't have the numbers correct, but I think 80% of the works of arts in the Vatican Museums are not even shown, but are in the vaults down there, are being restored, or other things need to be maintained. And there goes a lot of effort into this, and also this documentary shows us a bit. But Father, maybe also the same question more or less, but why are we putting so much effort in preserving art, and as a church, even in non-Christian art?
Well, I think it's well worth any effort that we can throw into it, because going into a church is for anyone, as a believer or a non-believer, it ought to be a transforming experience. There's a wonderful phrase in Henry Adams's book Mont Saint-Michel in Chartres, where he talks about how St. Thomas's Summa is the greatest church ever built by man, and the Gothic cathedrals are the best expression of that. So there's the intellectual church and there's the architectural church. And when you step into St. Peter's, you're stepping into Catholicism. You're stepping into the sacramental life. There's an altar where sacrifices are offered. There's confessionals where sins are forgiven. There's a baptismal chapel where sin is washed away, original sin, the fall. It's all there. The whole church is there too. There's people walking around who are the church militant, right? There's tombs, church suffering, people you can pray for in purgatory. And then there's saints, fresco. Well, there's not many paintings, right? There's lots of mosaics, statues of all these saints who are the most alive part of the Catholic Church. And when you step into a church, you have to think that. These aren't meant to be simply reminders of things from the past. They're in the church now, and they're more alive than we are. So when you walk into it, you're walking into a church, you're walking into Catholicism. And if you understood everything that you saw in St. Peter's, well, it would take a long time to explain it, but you would know the history of the Western civilization practically, certainly the history of the church, and enormous volumes of theology are present in everything that you're looking at. You just it has to be teased out, explained by Liz or something.
Liz, would you agree that it's important to preserve that?
Absolutely. I absolutely. I also think, though, it's so from the admission that I am of the James Cameron, Steven Spielberg, George Lucas generation. So the grandness of something like St. Peter's, the Sistine Chapel, appeals to me a great deal, always has, and probably always will. But I think it's important to remember works of art that are also meant for intimate contemplation. I mean, there's another aspect of art that's beyond just the huge, sweeping, amazing, being caught up in something, but also something that's much more personal and that helps to enhance the personal relationship of prayer. We have plenty of these lovely little objects. I use the Vatican Museums as an example, but you can find them in museums all over the world, sadly, in museums. But, an exquisite Fra Angelico little panel, which was really meant to be held and looked at and to be this conduit into a space of prayer. So art really has more than just the immense sweeping type of experience, but it also has an experience, it has such a vast number of experiences. So it can be this exquisitely gold paneled, beautifully crafted work to a painting by Caravaggio that's gritty and brutal and graphic. And it's amazing how art is able to speak to so many of us. That's what makes it universal. There's so many different expressions that help us to kind of enter into how our spiritual life is going to unfold.
Definitely. Maybe just on this, is this something that all stopped with Caravaggio, with Michelangelo's Pietà, or is it something that we can also say today for artists and maybe for the whole panel, that yes, also today, art is being produced where we can stop and say, this piques my interest, or that leads me closer either to church, to faith, to Jesus ultimately?
I think there are plenty of contemporary artists who are doing great work, painters and sculptors, I would say, both in Europe and the United States. I don't know elsewhere, but I certainly know young artists who are very interested in capturing the greatness of the expression of the faith that's present in Caravaggio or someone like that, but with more contemporary artistic forms. But they're as devoted to that project as anyone ever was in the Middle Ages or in the Renaissance.
I think there's a little difference in the audience. I was watching I was looking at something about the Sagrada Familia last night and thinking what an extraordinarily beautiful expression of modern art and architecture it is. And we know of those many wonderful fresco artists, oil painters, stained glass workers. There's a lot of very fine artists. I think our problem is more that of the audience today and how we respond. We seem to be more open to responding to a work of art that was produced 400, 500 years ago. It seems to be easier for us to stand in awe of that than in something that's produced today. I think we have much less of a sense of that hero worship, really, that Michelangelo, and even Caravaggio and Raphael and Leonardo experienced. Instead, our tastes, our way of experiencing art has really shifted much more into film and digital imagery, and it makes it a little bit, I think it makes it quite difficult for a contemporary artist who works in one of the more traditional media to be able to really be noticed and be successful in the same way.
I was just in the Sagrada Familia in September.
Yeah, just rub it in.
And it was full. I mean, I was huge lines to get in. You have to have an appointment to get in. It's hard to get in. And tons of tourists from Asia, Japanese, and who are not presumably Catholic, and they were flocking to see Gaudi's basilica. And people were, you can tell, just walking around inside the Sagrada Familia, and that's still being built now. As we speak, the impact that it was having on people. Now, did it make them believe? I don't think so, but it certainly was a huge hook. And I was just telling someone recently that I think that one of the things the church should probably do is canonize Antoni Gaudí. He was an extremely devout person, a holy man, truly a holy man, as well as one of the greatest architects of the last 100 years. And the same thing would be said, I think, for Flannery O'Connor. And two great statements of holiness and artistic excellence would be a great message for the world today.
Yeah, and how can you not start believing that there must be something more when you enter the Sagrada Familia?
Yeah. No, you think, why would anyone make something so beautiful, spend all of their life, all of their energy on this thing for something that we can't see, right? And I think that's one of the things that you're immediately struck by, that it's over the top. Right? It transcends our human experience, right? And it's clearly pointing you to something beyond that seems, at the same time, accessible and real. And it's God.
Thank you.
It seems to me that the Sagrada Familia has something very much in common with St. Peter's and the great cathedrals, like something like Notre Dame, for example, which is that this is a project that was launched with such power that it was able to keep growing despite different visions. I mean, the people who have worked on Sagrada Familia are not exactly cookie-cutter copies of what Gaudí did. The same thing with Bramante, who began St. Peter's, Michelangelo, who loathed Bramante, and yet completed St. Peter's. Then the adjustment to the church, which completely changed the design. You get Moderno, and you have 120 years of architects who are able to put together something so extraordinarily unified, despite different periods and different visions. And the beauty, I think, of churches like that, Sagrada Familia, St. Peter's, others, some of these great Gothic cathedrals, is that it really shows this power of the launching vision behind it, that even these artists who come from different perspectives, and I seem to remember one of the architects who worked on Sagrada Familia started out not believing and ended up converting during his time working on the church. So really this tremendous power that art has not only on the viewer, but on the people who are also producing it.
The church that wouldn't be like that is Monreale in Sicily, which was built all at once. And it's still there, and still as gorgeous as any.
And Sainte Chapelle.
I would love to open this conversation up a little bit also to our audience here. So if you have any questions, there's a microphone going around. Maybe just raise your hand that we can see you, and also you can pose your question. Do we have any questions here? Maybe before we come to that, also one last question, Anthony, to you. Especially, I mean, EWTN here in the Vatican Bureau, we're a lot about news, but primarily we're in the business really of evangelization. Do you think we should focus more also on art, just in order to reach people, especially in the digital world?
Should we focus more on art? Well, I'd say yes, because especially with the location that we have here, from the pieces that we recorded with patrons of the arts, I was even saying, well, we should have been doing this actually a long time ago, even more so, because I think it's one thing to explain, we do an excellent job, I think, in our news of explaining the role of the Holy Father and the message and also spreading the message of Pope Francis. I think we do a very good job at doing that. But when you're here and you're actually within, let's say, the Vatican culture, or maybe you're a tourist visiting here for the first time, it's a completely different world that you're entering into. And whatever we can do, I think from especially an artistic perspective, really serves Catholics, because, I mean, there's billions of Catholics around the world, but not all of them have been to Rome. So if we have the opportunity to give a piece of that every single day or every single week to them so they can make that part of their local identity as Catholics, I'd say the more the better.
Thank you. Please.
Hi, Brother Max. Just hopefully a quick question here, maybe for Liz or whoever wants to answer, but I frequently bring people through the Vatican Museum, and a lot of times you get to the section on modern art, and people are a little bit confused, trying to reconcile kind of all the classical and kind of Renaissance beauty they just saw with kind of the modern collection, which I think was mentioned in the clip that the Vatican has made an effort to acquire as well. So I don't know if you could shed some light on maybe kind of, is that reconcilable with all the beauty that we're describing and kind of the way that draws us towards God and towards our faith? And then you arrive to the kind of modern and contemporary art. How does that do the same thing, or does it do the same thing, or are there obstacles on that path, or is there some way of doing that? I don't know if you'd like to answer.
Thank you.
So I think there is a dramatic, I experience this too, and depending on my mood, it goes better or worse. There is a very important change in how art is produced, particularly as you move into the late 19th, early 20th century. So if the greatest patrons of art generally were ecclesiastical, then you move into the period of the Salon, where there's a series of rules governing, and there's an understanding of where the art is going to be shown, and it's just a different function and purpose for art. When you begin to hit the late 19th and 20th century, you have art that's really, this is easel painting, or it's just work that's meant to be moved through galleries. And so we start to change how the artist is relating to the work and its eventual location. And so it's a tremendously varied collection. So it's very hard to make a blanket statement, but it does explain a little bit of that disjointedness of how suddenly you're looking at sort of one thing that you've got a Rouault image of the Holy Face, and you can sort of begin to understand where this is a man who's responding to World War I with this sort of very stark image of Christ, and then you move into these sort of a Graham Sutherland crucifixion that's really quite jarring, or other works that really just seem to be plain old downright hideous. It does represent this crisis in art, and really ecclesiastical art has hit a very serious crisis because the church really didn't know how to commission it anymore. What are we asking for? We're just telling our artists to just make something, let art be free. And so it's a very interesting lesson on how to try to communicate with artists what they need to produce in order to create something that is the creativity of the artist, but also in line with what Catholics believe and what at the end of the day, art, as it was proclaimed post-Protestant Reformation after the Council of Trent, it's supposed to be clear, something you can understand. It's supposed to accurately represent the stories of the faith or our beliefs, and it's supposed to stimulate towards piety. And that's just been sort of shoved aside. But that said, I would point out something very interesting for when you're taking people through the very wonderful gift of the patrons of Monte Carlo, of the room with the images of Matisse, because it's one of the most, to me, it's the most interesting thing they have there, because Matisse is an artist who comes out of, he's baptized Catholic, but he has zero formation. He rejects his faith until the mid-19th century when a series of crises bring him back to the faith. And here you have a very established, very talented, very famous artist who wants to produce something religious, but there's no way he can produce a Sistine Chapel because he's not steeped in the culture. So what does he do? He plays to his strengths. And he makes that space. After all those sort of disjointed works that you've been walking through, you come into that room in the blues and the yellows and the greens, and it's peaceful. And you see this very clear series of petals for the Rosary Chapel, and you realize this man is trying to represent that for him, faith is peace. And he's using his art that way. So there is, that's a little flicker of hope in there, which I think is a very important thing to remember when we're dealing with contemporary art.
Father, would you agree, disagree?
I agree. I mean, I think we've all had the same experience. I'm not a tour guide, but I've taken many people to the Vatican Museums and the Basilica, and the modern art section is always one they walk through quickly. And it's a mystery. I mean, I mean that's a very interesting explanation for. I mean, I suspect there's also the subjectivity of modern art is very different. It's kind of what you're saying. I think it's similar to what you're saying. Is that the subjectivity? I see it in the literature. It's harder to relate to a broad public, right? It's not immediately obvious what's going on. If you know the story behind it, or the story of the life of the artist, it may become clearer, but people don't have that time when they're walking through the museums to have things explained in that way. They need to see it immediately, right?
Well,
but where do we find the Michelangelos? Where do we find the Sistine Chapels of today then?
I think they're working for Pixar. I think Pixar started out at the beginning before recent developments. It was everything that it had a positive message of faith and values, incredible love of creativity, and just each film they set themselves some new fascinating problem that they had to resolve. So technically, clever original storytelling. I think
A Bug's Life. They used medieval cathedrals. To get the effect of the light coming through the leaves for the bugs on the ground. The way that the light filters through is modeled on church light, basically.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting. Are we using this in any of our...
Well, I agree with both Liz and Father John. One question which I ask people from time to time is if you take the greatest cinematic artists, whether it's from animation or you take the greatest directors, and you plant them in the Renaissance, you give them a time machine, you plant them in the Renaissance, or let's say those people were born in Florence or Rome, in the 1400s, who would they have been and what would they have done? And so that's something that I think about. I don't have a clear answer. I don't know if any of you have answers for that too, but it's, to me, in order, where are the Michelangelos? I think it starts mostly at the parish level. And I think each church, even in the United States, I think each church in the United States should have like wood shop, glass, metal mechanics, things like that, because I think if you take people who are devout Catholics and then you teach them the arts, then they're making art in the way that expresses the faith. Whereas if you take someone who doesn't have that theological backing and and they're a good artist, but then you try to insert the faith into the person that's there, it's a little bit more difficult. Not to say it can't be done. Like I think Leonardo da Vinci, like he, as far as I know, was a professed atheist, yet he made the Last Supper. So to me, like it all starts at the parish level, maybe at the diocese, and then you go from there. But we have to create a culture of art, because where I came from, like I love the missions in California, but many of the other parishes, I mean, you could ask people going around the block and you'd say like, tell me what your favorite, most beautiful parish church is. And they couldn't really give you an answer. So that's one of the allures of also coming here to Europe, is that you see that. You see the beauty of the churches and people want that.
I would have thought you not go for wood workshops, but for like a laptop and a video camera.
Yes, and that too, And, we have a summer academy here in Rome, and that's one of the ideas.
That was the cue.
Yeah, beyond that. But, it goes both ways. I think one, in the digital sphere, we need people who are great shooters, great editors, great journalists, and then we give them the tools, and hopefully we network with them to expand on that and make beautiful work for people. But also, I think going forward, if we're talking about like physical church art, I'm a little bit concerned with artificial intelligence, that we can just create talking heads as much as we want. I think that artistry, the digital arts, I think are going to become under threat in the next like 10 years or so, because to me, if we can just automate everything, even the people, then in the end, I think maybe we'll move more and more into a more physical space where instead of making digital art, we'll be making physical art again.
Again, okay.
Yeah.
I have a couple little things I'd like
Please.
to
Yeah.
add there. One is, I think it's nice to have these classes about what makes a Michelangelo, what made him tick, what made him lose sleep at night, what made Raphael work, what made Leonardo work. There's got to be ambition and competition. There's got to be a prize out there. And it's got to be put together, the human element of wanting to excel, together with this spiritual element. So I think that's one thing. The other thing that, forgive me, but I'm going to walk back that professed atheist, Leonardo da Vinci. It is kind of I think a very common thing when we talk about the preservation of art. It is one thing to preserve the actual work of art, and it's also a very important thing to preserve the meaning and even the religious aspect of the artist. So when we say professed atheist in the 21st century, this is a rejection, an outright rejection of God. Leonardo is a man who, from what we understand from everything that he's written, he was distracted by science. But even when he paints the Last Supper, he says that he was worried about trying to lift the pencil to try to draw the face of Christ, because he didn't think he could do him justice, ergo believing in something like that. And towards the end of his life, we do hear from Giorgio Vasari that he says that he regrets that he spent his entire life studying things of this world, and he wanted to dedicate the final years studying things of the next. So I think just forgive me, but that when we use that modern language with people who, no matter what Leonardo da Vinci was struggling with, he was steeped in the religious world. He's painting for a room full of Dominicans. His entire body of work, with the exception of like the Mona Lisa, is really thinking about, but very complex things of the faith. He was invited to meditate on things like the Immaculate Conception, and it was something that intrigued him. So I think one of the important things about preservation of art on the part of us, custodians of this faith, is for us to remember to not to give those points to the people who would like to pull Leonardo da Vinci to a guy who just happened to be producing works of art for a paycheck or for his own glory, without any sense of what he was really engaging with. So
I think this is very interesting. Notice notion of, yes, admiring a piece of art just for itself, but then also learning about context, which can open up a completely new world, and also preserving sort of the understanding of the artist behind it, and but in the right context. I just would like to take the chance also to open it up. Are there any more questions? I have one here and here. Maybe we can take 2 or 3 questions at once.
Hello, thank you, Andreas. Part of my side hustle in Rome, I teach philosophy of art and beauty now at Catholic University of America. And just a personal story, the book that changed my life, little essay, was called Art and Contemplation by Josef Pieper, a German philosopher, who is part of the authors which I invoke in my classroom. And one of the kind of MOs or modus operandi that we study in terms of the artist himself or herself is this understanding of sublimity. Maybe I can ask Liz or Father John to speak about this more philosophically. It's like Michelangelo, one of my favorite anecdotes is when he walked into the Pantheon when he's looking for some type of scale model to build the Dome of St. Peter's. Of course, there was a dome already. It was called the Pantheon. It's basically St. Peter's Dome is a copy of the Pantheon. And he said, angels must have built this. It's just this awesome moment of his own infinite incapacity to do something great. Sort of like Leonardo with the pencil in his hand saying, I can't etch the face of Christ. Or Matisse saying, there's just no way that in my infinite capacity to sin that I can do something holy. And sometimes it's a sort of Hamlet moment for artists that it's to make art or not to make art. They just can't do it because they see themselves as infinitely incapable compared to the great artist himself, which is God. Maybe Liz can maybe tell us a few other anecdotes about artists that are in a way insecure about doing something of greatness because they know that in their own comparison and their own simple dignity that they really not as great as the true artist himself.
Thank you. Maybe we can hold that. There was another question here. And yes, here and here.
Thank you. My question could go to all 3 speakers. I think every kind of art has its ability to communicate a value. Generally, if we talk about the artist, then we always go back to the past, giving the impression that the humanity has concluded the great art with the medieval or a certain period of history. We talk about Michelangelo and all Caravaggio, and etc., etc. My question is, do you think we will not have any more great artists in the future? And what should be done in order to promote millions of artists who also produce good things and great things that have also the ability to communicate values for life and humanity? Thank you.
Well,
Thank you.
can I?
Maybe one last one, just so we get through, and I'll repeat them. Yeah.
So I'd just like to ask the panel a bit more about artificial intelligence, because we're seeing an explosion in art produced by artificial intelligence, a lot of experimentation. Is it possible for artificial intelligence, in your opinion, to produce art that's also divine, drawing on centuries of resources that we can't access necessarily? Is that possible?
So, 2 very easy and short to answer questions. Please pick your...
I think, well, we mentioned 2 20th century artists, Gaudí and Flannery O'Connor, right? Being very notable cases of people who are both wholly and at the very top of their game in their field of expertise in architecture and in literature as artists. So there are examples, and those are examples, I think, to follow for modern artists. Flannery O'Connor is not only a good artist, but she also explains it well. Gaudí is less articulate about what he was doing, but Flannery O'Connor wrote essays explaining her vision of what literature was, and that, I think she offers a guidebook really for Catholic writers now and in the future. I think the example I mentioned of, the Passion of the Christ, Mel Gibson's, thing. It's in a certain sense a medieval passion play, filmed with modern technology, but it is modern art. There's no question of that. It's the other cases of Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, right? Two enormous figures in 20th century literature who are very serious believers and great artists whose work is successful and popular and appealing to mass audiences. So I don't think there's any reason to think that we have to look backwards to see examples of good art. There's a ton of great medieval and Renaissance art, and we should use it, right, and appreciate it and all. But I don't think it's something that's sort of lost in the past at all. I think, with respect, was Michael's question about contemplation. One of the things I think we probably should say, and hasn't been addressed yet, is that art, I think, is an invitation for us to know ourselves, about what makes us happy. Our response to art tells us something about who we are and what we're made for, and why we respond to beauty the way we do, and why we keep going back to works of art that we love. And it has something to do with the infinity of beauty, I think. In other words, one of the things about a work of art is you can listen to the same piece of music many, many times. You can go and see the Pietà, you can go see the Sistine Chapel again and again and again. And it doesn't get old. You know what you're going to see, right? But you want to see it more, and you want to keep seeing it. And that tells us something about ourselves, because we're called to contemplate beauty forever. That's what we're about, right? And the way we respond to art is just a little inkling of what we're actually all called to. So I think it's a very important stepping stone. It's not simple. We've talked about it being a hook, right? And it is that. It is a hook, the attraction of art. But it's also quite a bit more than that. And it tells us about the contemplative vocation that we all have ultimately. AI, I suspect that, I have no idea, to be honest, but I suspect it's possible that AI, because obviously AI is a kind of art in itself. We're the ones making it, and if we guide it well, it might come up with something that works. It's possible. That's my...
So I think it all comes back to this word art, or this artifacts, or what people, human beings make, and through their creativity. And so I think in regards to our first question, or to the question regarding is art dead, it's just a question of which media is going to come to the fore. Which art form is going to speak to us now? I agree with you that this explosion of Christian literature that just captured the imagination of generations showed that particular art form was coming to the fore, because people aren't particularly interested in paintings at the moment, or they're more interested in, I think storytelling is a very important part of understanding how we respond to art today. The big leap that everybody was talking about a minute ago, we go from Renaissance art, where you're telling stories, we go to film, where you're telling stories, and then you have these paintings that are just sort of expressions of something on a wall. So I think whichever form, whichever media allows human beings to creatively express something that resonates with other people in this particular moment in time. We always want to know, what's your story? I think that's the art form that will come to the fore, and the possibilities are always endless, because there are a lot of us, and where people are creative and they're brilliant and they look forward, they look for ways to express themselves. Insofar as the humility, I'd rather take the question of the humility of the artist. I think that really returns in that sense of what it is we're made for and who we are in every person. It's not just a question of being an artist and feeling unworthy. Try being a parent. right? The minute you get handed your kid, you're like,
That's an
okay,
art
this
too.
is bigger than me. So I think the first artistry comes in. I think we have a little baby in here. The first artistry comes in, this human being that you are going to be forming, shaping, molding as far as you can. So I think that truly beautiful creative spirit is something that has to be daunting. It's part of what makes it exciting and part of what makes it worth it. AI. Not so optimistic about it. And it comes back to the question of human creativity. You can program AI to make something that will be a semblance, but how on earth is artificial intelligence ever going to truly understand a sacrament? How on earth is artificial intelligence ever going to represent the personal experience of grief, of fellowship with Christ? There are periods in art, and I think we're in one right now. There are periods, the most famous one is called mannerism, right? So mannerism is this moment where the artifice, the artificiality, where the artist wants to show how clever he is, or he or she is, but it's mostly he's, how clever they are by making the color fake, by adding all these things to show, look what I can do. That art is the art you walk through without paying any attention to it. It's no longevity whatsoever because it's an art for art's sake. It's an art for, there are like 10 of us who love it because it just, we took that class in college and we still want to show we know something. But the fact is that it's not an art that's going to really resonate with people. And every now and then, just to test this, I like to take my students and just watch them look at me like, how can you even like this? Please don't make us have to study this. It's a pointless piece. So there's a kind of art that was really, every now and then we hit a kind of art, which is really just the artifice for the sake of making it. And that art, it just has no longevity. And I see AI as being just another manifestation of that.
Anthony.
Yeah, and I think to what you're saying too, Liz, especially talking about the human aspect that goes into making art, when as a video creator or as a filmmaker or as an artist, I've noticed that the most beautiful thing that comes out of a video we're using technology, of course, to make it, but it's going through the hands of human beings to make it, right? The finished product has some type of human spirit to it. Like it takes on a new essence, so to say. For videos that are generated by AI, we don't know, of course, how AI is going to evolve, but I don't see that same fire. Like I don't see the artist in that video. I don't see yet. The artist that we see is a robot, so maybe it could look good, maybe it could look professional, but it's missing something there. In terms of the aspect of the sublime, as Michael talked about, I think building on that point too, whenever I, as a filmmaker, go out into a shoot, there's always two things you want to do. Well, one, you want to work with your team, but as internally up here in your head, you want to think here, you want to think here as well, or feel here. Namely that you want to trust your instincts, those skills that God has given you, but then you also want to maintain a certain sense of quiet that you can be receptive to the Holy Spirit and how, especially in a religious work, how God wants you to make that piece. One thing I tell people all the time is that if you want to feel the power of the Holy Spirit, when you're video editing, the best thing you can do is edit after 1:30 a.m. in the morning. So there's many edits I've done that have ended at 4 a.m., 5 a.m., 6 a.m. And if you've been shooting from 2 p.m. to 8 p.m., and then you got to edit after that, as a human being, you have limits. Like, you're done. So you're just sitting there at the computer like a zombie, like this the whole time. And what happens is that somehow something is pushing the buttons. I don't know what it is, but it doesn't feel like it's entirely me.
And that was because of course, before your time at EWTN.
And during time at EWTN too. But at EWTN, one of the great aspects of EWTN, I think, from a filmmaking perspective, is that, people who watch what's on television don't understand the amount of hours and work and dedication that the whole team puts into it. So if AI were to say take over all of digital broadcasting and media, yes, the hard work would, yes, it eliminates our need to work on
We would
product.
go to bed earlier.
We go to bed earlier, yes, too. Anyone who's a part of World Youth Day can remember that, all the intense hours and work that we had to do as a part of that broadcast. But I think when you watch that video, I'm talking more from personal experience now, but when you watch the broadcasts and the videos now from the behind the scenes perspective, you know how much blood, sweat, and tears went into that. And so from that aspect, I really hope that, I would encourage everyone when you watch a video, whether it's a short video or if it's a TV broadcast, think of the people who are making that and putting in the hours and the work and really appreciate it. Because if we don't appreciate it, then it's just going to be taken over by machines.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
I don't know how you all feel, but to me it seems we haven't even started. It's such a broad field, treasures of art and faith. Thank you so much for coming. The idea of Roman Nights is not really to come to a conclusion. It's really, let it be a starting point. And let's continue this conversation that we had up here, that we had together. To help facilitate this, we prepared outside a few refreshments. And I hope you all still have a little bit of time also to speak to the panel, but also amongst each other, of treasures of art and faith. Where do we find the new artists? Where will artificial intelligence lead us? And then maybe we'll go to bed as Anthony usually does when he creates pieces of art. Where can you find those pieces of art? I'm sorry, I just have to make this announcement also, so you can see the whole documentary soon. Once we're through with it on Vaticano on EWTN or you just watch the Vaticano shows on your television. Every Sunday they're being aired in English and then also in 13 other languages in different countries. Thank you so much for coming, Liz, Father. Thanks. Anthony, please give a warm round of applause.